So I'm going to start now because we do have quite a few presentations, and what we'll do is we'll use these recordings to share with your colleagues. So as I said before, we do have quite a busy agenda. I'm actually going to speak around the New Plastics Economy Global Commitment. Melanie is going to give the welcoming remarks from Jeff Islands. We have a case study from New Zealand with Liz Butcher, and then Joel Sulsif is going to talk about circular solutions and give some examples of effective solutions to address plastic leakage. And we'll also have time for a good roundtable discussion at the end. Now, today, the way to interact is actually, normally it's through the Q&A box. And I'm going to ask, since there's not many of you, if you could just use the chat actually, because I think that'll be a much more interactive session. Because there's not many of us as well, I'd ask if you could raise your hand if you'd like to speak, and we can actually promote you to a speaker. And that way you can also ask questions as well. So please use the chat box to introduce yourself. If you want to use the question and answers, please do so as well, but feel free to use, put your questions in the chat box as well, and put your hand up if you'd like to speak. So I'm going to just hand over to Melanie Ashton now, and she's going to give a brief introduction and set the scene from Jeff Islands for this workshop. Hi, Melanie.
Hi, thanks so much, Alison. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all here today to the first Jeff Islands webinar. We ran this webinar in the Caribbean last week, and today, obviously, for the Pacific region. The Global Environment Facility, Implementing Sustainable Low and Non-Chemical Development in Small Island Developing States, Jeff Islands Program, supports 33 SIDS across the Caribbean, Indian and Pacific Oceans to safely and sustainably manage chemical and hazardous waste. In the next year, we'll also be expanding to welcome Atlantic SIDS. A global project, the project I coordinate, facilitates SIDS to SIDS learning across and between project regions, including through dedicated communities of practice on the Green Forum and jeffislands.org, our knowledge management platform. As part of our SIDS to SIDS learning over the next 5 years, Jeff Islands will be hosting webinars on key issues SIDS are facing in managing chemicals and waste. We will bring you insights, shared experiences, and hopefully some thought leadership on how SIDS can move towards non-chemical development. We hope that these webinars will assist in identifying opportunities for SIDS and provide a space to share best practices and also solutions. And we're excited to have the opportunity to bring SIDS community together through this medium, and look forward to an animated discussion in the roundtable later on. Today, in our first webinar, we're exploring plastics. The issues of persistent organic pollutants and plastics are linked on many levels. Plastics and POPs pose distinct risks to human health at every stage of their respective life cycles. In the manufacture of plastics, various chemical additives are included to improve their quality and durability, despite potentially negative health and environmental effects. For example, PBDEs are a group of brominated flame retardants that includes substances listed in the Stockholm Convention for elimination. Penta-BDE has been used in polyurethane foam for car and furniture upholstery, and Octa and Deca are used in plastic casings for electronics. HBCD is a brominated flame retardant used in polystyrene building insulation, and PFOS is used in the textiles industry as well as the rubber and plastics industries. SCCPs, recently added to the Stockholm Convention, are industrial chemicals primarily used in metalworking, but are also used in plastic as softeners in plastics. They were recently found in an IPEN study in baby bibs and other plastic products favored by children. It goes without saying that recycling materials containing POPs contaminates the resulting products and continues the legacy of hazardous emissions and exposures. This is especially damaging to a true circular economy. A lot of plastic is contaminated with POPs, and halogenated plastics such as PVC produce POPs, dioxins, and furans when banned. And sadly, the links between POPs and plastics don't end with specific products that require careful management. Unfortunately, microplastics, ubiquitous in the world's ocean, excuse me, are hydrophobic in nature and absorb and carry carcinogenic POPs. That is, microplastics assist in the long-range environmental transport of these chemicals that we're trying to phase out. Jeff Islands SIDS are culturally diverse and geographically isolated from each other. However, they have some important things in common. They're largely import-dependent economies located remotely from global markets and commonly with outer islands spread across vast distances. This situation is exacerbated by limited available landmass to manage waste, high economic vulnerability to economic and natural exogenous shocks, and a lack of critical mass of people, infrastructure, and investments to manage chemicals and waste. Across the Caribbean, Indian Ocean, and Pacific regions, Jeff Islands is investing $20 million over the next 5 years to enhance the safe management of products entering SIDS, that is, focusing on closing the material and product loops. The outcome we're working towards is the prevention of the buildup of harmful materials and chemicals, and this will be achieved through establishing effective circular and life cycle management systems in partnership with the private sector. Achieving this requires action from all actors: SIDS governments, the private sector, and the SIDS population. And so, with that brief overview of the interaction between POPs Plastics and Jeff Islands, I'm very pleased to introduce today's webinar topic on the new plastics economy global commitment. The global commitment provides a voluntary framework for government and private sector stakeholders to develop and report on plastics pollution. This framework is rooted in circularity and it allows governments to voluntarily test different approaches to address the full life cycle of plastics products. SIDS face unique challenges around plastic waste, and solutions and lessons learned from the global commitment signatories can provide SIDS with important insights into key progress areas. This includes the elimination of problematic or unnecessary plastic packaging through redesign and innovation, designing for reuse, recycling, and composting, decoupling, that is primarily by reducing the need for virgin plastic, consumer awareness and behavior change, as well as measuring and reporting. We very much hope that the webinar is informative, generative, and useful to your work. And we hope you'll join the Islands community of practice on plastics on the Green Forum. The links to the Green Forum and to jeffislands.org will be in the chat. And we hope that you'll use these spaces to continue the conversation and exchange on this key issue. Thank you very much for attending today, and we look forward to an animated discussion. Thanks, Alison.
Thanks, Melanie. And thanks for the introduction, setting the scene so well. I think you really highlighted the need for action across a number of critical areas. And a big thank you to you and the Jeff Islands team for organising the webinar as well. Okay, so actually I'm going to be the next speaker and I'm going to be talking about the global commitment. I'm going to cover what it aims to achieve, who is a member, how to become a member, and what being a signatory to the global commitment entails. I'll also talk about some of the benefits of joining. Okay, so in 2018, the new Plastics Economy Global Commitment was launched with the goal of uniting businesses, governments, and other stakeholders to commit to change on how we produce, use, and reuse plastic through eliminating the plastic we don't need, innovating so all plastic we do need is designed to be safely reused, recycled, or composted, and circulating everything we use to keep it in the economy and out of the environment. There are now more than 1,000 organisations from across the whole plastic value chain united under the global commitment, from plastic producers to leading brands and retailers, as well as waste management companies, but also governments and NGOs across the world. The initiative has proven to be able to drive ambition and progress through harmonised definitions, a joint reporting system against ambitious targets, and through a shared approach to address the root causes of plastic pollution. Let's look at a few key points. Firstly, the global commitment unites governments, businesses, and other organisations behind a common vision, which I'll talk about in detail a little later. But it seeks to address plastic waste and pollution at its source. It's led by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, who's responsible for the private sector engagement, and in collaboration with UNEP, which leads the engagement with the governments. Importantly, it's a voluntary framework for action to help members to address plastic pollution and report on progress. Signatories commit to actions and targets which they hope to reach by 2025 and beyond, and then report on progress to meet those targets. Remember, it's a target, so we encourage signatories to develop ambitious targets and try very hard to meet them and make them, but there's no penalties if you don't. Global commitments already a key instrument internationally to engage the private sector in fighting plastic pollutions and governments. There are over 500 plus signatories representing over 20% of the global plastic packaging, with more than 250 businesses across all stages of the plastic packaging value chains represented under the global commitment. There are an additional 200 plus endorsing signatories and 20 national, subnational and local level government actors across 5 continents, and with another 11 recently pledging their support. Now, at the heart of the New Plastics Economy Initiative is a vision of a circular economy for plastic in which plastic never becomes pollution or waste. Signatories to the global commitment commit to a common vision, which has 6 key points. And I've put these 6 key points up here. They're around elimination of problematic or unnecessary plastic packaging, reuse models which are applied where relevant, reducing the need for single-use products and packaging. All plastic packaging is 100% reusable, recyclable or compostable. 4, all plastic packaging is reused, recycled or composted in practice. 5, the use of plastic is fully decoupled from the consumption of finite resources. And 6, all plastic packaging is free of hazardous chemicals and the health, safety and rights of all people involved are respected. Okay, so these are the common vision and this is what we seek to put targets against and report on. Now, before we look in more detail to these, let's get an understanding of who the current government signatories are and what the signatories commit to doing. So looking at that in detail, we see the government signatories at the end of last year, but we're very pleased to announce at the start of this year that another 11 governments committed in February to become signatories over the course of 2022. So if you look at this map, keep that in mind, and then that's the map now, including all those 11 governments at local, but also at national level, who have pledged to join the commitment over the course of this year. And what would be really exciting would be to see more small island developing states join from the Pacific. And that would really help bring more attention to the specific needs of small island developing states to combat plastic pollution, but also offers the opportunity to share your work and identify where you need more support to address this critical issue. Okay, so now what is it that governments sign up to when they become a signatory to the global commitment? So governments sign a signatory document where they endorse the common vision for a circular economy for plastics. They also commit to work with all necessary stakeholders to achieve the common vision and to report their progress transparently and annually, so we know whether and what progress we are making. More specifically, governments are the key actors that can shift action across all stages of the life cycle. In the global commitment, they are requested to implement actions across these stages, and you'll see A to F there, and they're very much around those action areas that we talked about before, around eliminating problematic or unnecessary products, around fostering reuse schemes, closing the loop by ensuring that what is recycled is actually brought back into the economy with new products, and finally on continuing awareness raising towards behavioural change. That's an F. So that's what governments commit to actions against. And I've put this in another slide just so that you can see those 6 action areas there. So this is in the signatory document, and a government signatory will outline concrete actions they commit to in each of these 6 areas. In addition, when making commitments, we also encourage governments to set up a baseline and targets so that progress can be tracked quantitatively in the annual reporting process. Now, all governments need to set up quantitative baselines and targets for Area D, which we think is very important. I mean, they're all important, but this one we think is one where we really want baselines and targets on collection and recycling. And then they also have to select at least 2 additional areas to set up quantitative baseline and targets. So Liz may talk a little bit further about that because she's going to give an example of New Zealand's commitment in the next presentation. But what I wanted to do is just give you a quick example of what some governments, other governments do. So this is around Action Area A, stimulating the elimination of problematic or unnecessary plastic packaging. And this is an example of what the government of Chile did. They developed for their target for Area A on elimination. In this case, Chile determined a baseline based on information that Chile had sold 2.5 billion plastic bags in 2017. And Chile were signed on in 2018. So that makes sense around the date because they're one of our first signatories. And they set this target to reach 100% elimination from 2018. And as you can see, they also set out how they would reach this target by implementing their law, which bans plastic bags in retailing in the country. So as you can see here, this is an example that shows you that the global commitment doesn't necessarily mean we need governments to think of brand new commitments or brand new actions. You can make your commitments based on your existing actions as long as your ambition level is quite high around the targets that you seek to achieve by 2025. Now on the next slide, I'm just showing you something around Area D. So this is something that all governments now need to set a baseline and a target and give some quantitative baseline. And here is an example from France. This is, as a baseline, governments should indicate the percentage and the metric tons of the plastic waste collective or effectively recycled in a specific baseline year, and then indicate the target percentage to be collected, recycled, or composted by 2025. And there's an example of France and how they did it and how they set the target. Just lastly, here's one more example. Under Area F, we encourage governments to stimulate behavioural change through carrying out domestic or joining international communication campaigns and initiatives. And this is one example here with Peru around developing actions around education and training. A lot of government signatories are also part of the UNEP Clean Seas campaign, so that's another example. And I'm sure there's lots of good examples in the Pacific region that you're doing around national levels of consumer campaigns to drive behavioural change. So just quickly, global commitment, why join? Good question. Firstly, you join a club of active, committed organisations and governments who are prepared to publicly take on commitments and measure progress, and that can really help drive change. After decades of growth, virgin plastic use appears to have peaked amongst the brands and retailers who are members of the global commitment and is set to fall faster by 2025 with around a total of 19% reduction in virgin plastic use and packaging amongst signatories of the global commitment. Noting that these companies are still growing, that's an impressive result. However, I should add that progress has largely been driven by recycling, and while this is a positive step, it's not enough to solve plastic pollution. Much more focus must urgently go to eliminating single-use packaging in the first place, but it's a positive start. The GC also offers an established voluntary framework for countries to bring all the initiatives and activities together in a coordinated place. It gives the opportunity for policymakers to see the big picture and understand what progress reporting entails. It can also really help to identify where you need further support and resources to understand your baseline, set targets, and measure progress in a supportive way with other leading countries. And this is important because we need urgent action. At the start of March, we witnessed an historic solution to end plastic pollution. Sorry, I've changed it too much. There we go. Towards an internationally legally binding instrument. There'll be many negotiations around this, but drawing your attention to paragraph 15 of that resolution, we note that member states are called upon to continue to step up activities and adopt voluntary measures to combat plastic pollution, and on a voluntary basis collect statistical information. Now, this is critical, and we know we cannot afford to slow down our progress on addressing plastic pollution. In a small island developing states, I think you're well aware of the negative impact of plastic pollution on your communities, and you know that we need to maintain the pressure and parallel to negotiations over the next 2 years. So this is what the global commitment can provide: a supportive environment for governments to test and develop solutions to suit your needs. And in turn, this can also assist you in understanding your needs in a future international instrument, whatever that may be. So therefore, if you are interested in exploring becoming a signatory, we'd be very happy to support this process at national level or through working with SPREP and of course through the Jeff Islands program. I can share links to further resources. You may already have some in the chat box. You're most welcome to get in touch with myself or other members of the team. There's Lorenz and also Run's email there, and they also look after the global commitment and government engagement at UNEP. And there's also a link to the signatory pack, which hopefully has been shared in the chat, or I will also circulate afterwards. And that's my presentation. Thank you for letting me present today. And I'm very happy now to hand over to Liz. And Liz, I've got your presentation all loaded up. So if you just tell me next slide, we can move straight onto that. And Liz is going to give a case study of New Zealand's experience on joining the global commitment. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks, Alison. Tēnā koutou, ko Liz Butcher tuku ingoa. Hello, my name is Liz. I'm currently the acting manager in the waste streams policy team at the Ministry for the Environment in New Zealand. So our team looks at policy issues that are related to specific waste streams. Plastic is a major focus for us and is a key kind of part of my usual role when I'm not in the acting manager's seat. So I was asked to speak today and share some of our experiences around the new plastics economy global commitment. So to kind of kick this off, I wanted to set a little bit of context around the journey that we have been on over the last 3 to 4 years as part of our plastics work and as part of our kind of broader waste and resource efficiency work program. So if you can go to the next slide. So over the last few years, research in New Zealand has shown consistently that the buildup of plastic in the environment is one of the top 5 concerns for New Zealanders. And so with this growing awareness across New Zealand as well as internationally, we've also seen our policy work program grow. This isn't just in response to plastic, but also our wider waste work program. And currently we have more people working on waste than ever before. And plastics as well, but also our program of work is bigger and we have high levels of public interest in the work that we're doing. So our journey with plastics started back in 2018 when the government banned microbeads in personal care products, and this was soon followed by a ban on single-use plastic shopping bags. The plastic bag ban was hugely visible here in New Zealand, and both the public and businesses really got behind it. What we saw was that this really sparked a shift in kind of consumer behaviour and thinking around plastic. Then later that year, we had the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor also release a report on plastics, and that report makes over 50 different recommendations for how New Zealand could change the way that we think about plastics and have a more sustainable relationship with plastic. So when I think about the global commitment and how that fits in with our work, I would consider it to be in some ways a very small component of our work program. But it plays a really important role in setting our direction, and it underpins a lot of the work that we're doing. So if we could move to the next slide, please. So why did we join the global commitment? So about the time that we joined in late 2018, early 2019, we were working quite closely with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation on a Ohanga Amiamio Circular Economy Conference here in New Zealand. And we were thinking more broadly about how we create the settings here in our domestic policy in New Zealand to move towards a more circular economy. We wanted to do more on plastics, and in June 2018, we launched the New Zealand Plastic Packaging Declaration, which asks businesses to pledge a commitment towards having 100% recyclable or compostable plastic packaging by 2025. And that declaration was really designed to align with the global commitment as well. So signing up to the global commitment really seemed like a natural next step for us, and a good way to kind of help us take the next step in terms of thinking about our plastics work program. Next slide, please. So I thought I would just briefly touch on what some of our commitments were back in 2019 when we signed up. I won't read out everything on this slide, but I guess to give a little bit of context, when we signed up, we had a very small plastics team. It was one person full-time, and we weren't very clear at that stage on what our next steps were and where we were headed in terms of our direction of travel. So we based our initial commitments off our broader waste work program at the time, and some of the key actions that we included were things that we had planned or already underway, and included things like the ban on plastic bags, the New Zealand Plastic Packaging Declaration, work that we were doing to that is paid on waste disposed to landfill, which will incentivise more waste reduction, but also create further revenue to fund more waste minimisation projects, and also developing a national plastics action plan. So that's sort of where we started when we kind of joined the commitment about 3 years ago. If we could move to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, for us, the global commitment has really been a very small part of our overall work program on plastics over the last few years, but it definitely has some benefits for our work. Firstly, the global commitment vision and goals, and that has acted as a bit of an anchor for our work program. And because it's built on a kind of a credible platform and knowledge base, we've been able to really draw on that to inform some of our own policy making as well. Joining the global commitment sent a signal to our domestic industry around our ambitions and what we considered to be important for driving a circular plastic economy in Aotearoa. And it's informed investment as well. So, for example, we have recently funded projects through our Waste Minimisation Fund to develop a roadmap for New Zealand's plastic industry to become more circular. And we've also funded industry to closely with businesses and provide practical support and guidance to help businesses move higher up the waste hierarchy when thinking about their plastic packaging. The annual reporting makes us accountable, and that is mainly to ourselves as well. It's a really good opportunity for us to reflect on the journey that we've been on, what we've achieved over the last 12 months, and what else we might want to do to kind of move our plastics work forward. Lastly, one of the things that I think is really valuable about the global commitment is that it's had enough flexibility to allow us to determine kind of our own individual commitments and how we would like to make the actions that we would like to take to achieve the different target areas that Alison outlined in her presentation earlier. And that flexibility has meant that it can kind of fit in and align with all of the other work that we're doing, but hasn't been, I guess, onerous or required a lot of extra work for us. So if we can move to the next slide. So I wanted to kind of quickly touch base on where we are now, kind of 3 years joining the global commitment. And I think it's fair to say that our work program has really evolved. Last year, we delivered our first National Plastics Action Plan, and this plan brings together some existing actions that we already had underway and that are reflected in our individual commitments, but it also outlines some new actions that we plan to take. The plan's vision is aligned with the global commitment and has kind of 3 key principles. The first one is less plastics, so reducing the use of unnecessary and problematic plastics. More circular, so enabling plastic to be used in ways that will keep it circulating within our economy for as long as possible. And lastly, better for the environment, so minimising the harm from the plastic that we do use and reducing the buildup of plastic in the environment. And if we move to the next slide, there was another slide in here, but I think it was accidentally hidden. So one of the kind of major actions that we currently have underway is the mandatory phase out of hard to recycle and single-use plastics. And this includes bans on a range of different plastic products, including all food and beverage packaging PVC and polystyrene, which are plastics that we can't recycle here in New Zealand and that are currently contaminating our recycling system. So these phase outs will kind of happen over 3 different tranches between now and 2025. And the regulations for the first tranche, which includes things like plastic cotton buds, plastic drink stirrers, expanded polystyrene, food and drink packaging, polystyrene takeaway packaging, and some PVC trays and containers, as well as oxo-degradable and photodegradable plastics that will come into force on the 1st of October this year. And then we'll have a second tranche in 2023 and another tranche in 2025. So this project is a good example of one of the ways that we plan to achieve our individual commitments under the New Plastics Economy Global Commitment, and is also one of our key actions under the Plastics Action Plan. And very briefly, some of the other actions that we now have underway or planned include regulated product stewardship for all plastic packaging types, a newly established $15 million Plastics Innovation Fund, investment in to improve better collection, sorting and processing of plastics. We've recently published a position statement on compostable plastic products, and we're looking at conducting some research into the impact that those products have on soil. And at the moment, we're also out for consultation publicly on some proposals to develop a container return scheme for beverage containers, and also to standardise our curbside recycling system across the country, which will include things like moving towards a standardised list of materials to be collected for recycling. Lastly, as part of our kind of wider waste work program, the ministry is also looking to refresh our national waste strategy and to update our legislation so that we have the right foundations in place to be able to transition New Zealand towards a low waste and low carbon future. And last slide, I think, coming up. So I was also asked to just briefly touch on some thoughts around the recent decision at UNEA 5.2. The resolution agreed at UNEA to negotiate a global plastics agreement is consistent with our domestic policy work on plastics, as well as our broader waste work program. And we're really looking forward to participating in the INC process later on. Off. As part of these negotiations, we will be guided by principles of a circular economy, the waste hierarchy, and a life cycle approach, which is consistent with both of our National Plastics Action Plan, but also the draft waste strategy that we recently consulted on. So next steps for us include getting agreement from our cabinet on how we negotiate in these negotiations, and how we engage, as well as checking in with some sort of key stakeholders to help inform our position. And that was all I had to cover off, but happy to answer any questions around our involvement with the New Plastics Economy Global Commitment.
Thanks so much, Liz. And I really appreciate you spending time sharing your experience with us, and lots of learnings that you've shared with us today. Obviously you've started quite small, like all of us, lots of countries, and it's just grown hugely. Is that difficult to sort of manage, like all of a sudden the interest and that's a good thing, people are interested in action. But is that difficult also to manage and move quickly as fast as people want you to move from a policy perspective?
Yes, definitely. It definitely is always more that we would love to do. And there's always more that we know we need to do. And I think one of the challenges as well was just staying across everything that's happening across the world, and all of the kind of innovation and changes in policy and new research. It can be, I guess, overwhelming at times, but that is one of the benefits, I think, of the New Plastics Economy Global Commitment, is that it does bring a lot of that information together, and we can see what other countries who are kind of in a similar pathway to us are doing as well, and learn from their experience.
Yep, good point. And I'm going to ask, this is always a difficult question because I know there's lots of difficult things to do when you're developing policy and implementing actions. But what are, if you had to think of some of the really difficult issues, what would you say is sort of maybe your top two real key barriers to addressing plastic pollution in New Zealand?
Oh,
and maybe we won't say top two because it's hard to prioritize really, but is it difficult to get data, for example? Because I know that probably lots of people online today have a difficulty with getting good data sometimes. How does that work for you, and how do you get around that problem?
We're really limited. That is probably one of, actually that's a really good one to call out. We don't have good data. At the moment, we're looking as a kind of a broader waste division around how we can get better waste data in general, and that will include plastics, but it is going to take a while to get there. I think one of the ways that we will be starting to get around that is just through relationships with industry. So there is work underway by industry here in New Zealand to improve their own data, and so by us working with industry, that will help to improve our knowledge and get access to that data too.
Yep. No, it's a common, I think this is a common problem for everyone. So it's good to sort of share ideas. And I guess what's important is also not waiting for the best data or all the data, but just getting on with some activities and trying to address something. I'm just going to answer a question that I think was directed towards me, and it's a bit hard for me to see all the questions. So Melanie, if you want to jump in and ask me a question, if you see I've missed one, please do so. But I think somebody asked about export trade statistics or on waste, and whether that data was around. And I'm just going to highlight that last Thursday, UNEP actually held a webinar on modelling solutions for plastic pollution and looking at data requirements. And I'm going to send a link to that webinar because it was the first one that we had, and it's very much in line with the question around understanding more about the problem and understanding how we model different solutions. So I'm going to send that to everyone because that actually may answer some questions, but also it will highlight that we don't have good data, and that's why I asked Liz that question as well, but that we can develop models and try and simulate what the results would be of different types of actions that we implement on the ground. And Joel's probably going to have some good thoughts later on in his presentation around this. Liz, just another question here around banning. I mean, there's lots of countries ban products, plastic products, or introduce bans. I think you mentioned that plastic bags and retailers was banned. How easy is that to do in practice?
We have found, there's always going to be a challenge or an initial. But the way that we approached it here in New Zealand is we actually had some of the major retailers, the supermarket brands, and some of the other kind of big retailers come on board with that phase out before our ban came into place. And that meant that they actually voluntarily phased out plastic bags before our ban happened, which gave the public some time to kind of adjust to the fact that it was going to happen for all retailers. And we had a really kind of big lead-in time, a lot of publicity around it. So we found that in general, the public and businesses really got behind it, and people adjusted really, really fast. If anything, it really kind of sparked interest from both the public, but also a lot of businesses to kind of do more and to think about what other kind of easy, simple actions they could take to reduce waste.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a good example, and I know that there's other some of you online today will be able to give examples that you can share and talk about later in this session around what policies you've introduced in your countries. Please share that on the chat, or you can ask a question. And I've got a couple of questions here for you, Liz, but one is New Zealand doing much work on microplastics?
Not a lot of work that's been led out of the Ministry for the Environment, but I am aware that there is some research that has been funded through other government agencies on microplastics. One of the other pieces of work that I briefly touched on in my presentation is we're looking at the role currently of compostable plastics and what impact that might have on soil health, and that will look at microplastics as well.
Okay, excellent, thank you. And here's a good question here. This person is keen, and thank you, Nitish, for your question. Liz, keen to understand how other sustainable alternatives to plastics were promoted to communities, like use of more traditional or cultural products using leaves as packaging, etc. So it's a good question.
Yeah, that is a really good question. It's we have provided kind of some general guidance around different types of alternatives that could used, and I think our key message has been the whole way along that reusable is always going to be the preference, and that could be things from home, you know, for our kind of New Zealand communities, that could be flax or harakeke kites that they could take to the supermarket instead of having to buy new reusable bags. I think it's also fair to say that there's been a lot of work happening within our kind of local councils to support their communities as well. So it's kind of, I guess, been a bit of a two-tiered approach as well, and by other community organisations and non-government organisations.
Yep, that's actually a really interesting point. I think that idea that you have to do action at different levels, right through at community level and then up at national level and regional level. So really good point there, Liz. One more question perhaps, and it's really around how does New Zealand plan to adapt your current National Plastics Action Plan to reflect, I guess, the developing treaty, or whatever the treaty ends up looking like?
Our current focus right now is really on preparing for entering into those discussions as part of the INC process. And then depending on the outcome of that process, we will be giving some thought into, you know, what that looks like and what that means for our domestic policy, including our National Plastics Action Plan. So I don't have the answer really to that right now, but it is something that we will have to think about.
Yep, sure. No, that's a good answer. Thanks, Liz, so much. We're going to have a time for discussion maybe at the end, so please stay on because we'll probably come back to you. But I also want to share, there's lots going on in the chat. I can see people sharing. I've got an example here from Samoa. We have the regulation developed in 2018 to ban single-use plastic shopping bags in Samoa. Again, in 2020 in January, we banned styrofoam, and we're looking to add other problematic plastic items to our list starting in the next financial year, starting July 2022 to June 23. And this is really great news. Glad to hear all those efforts, Samoa. And I see there around getting back to us around assistance on technical knowledge on some of these plastics. Yes, we welcome your questions, and also you've identified that you need support. It's a good conversation to have. So please keep adding these reflections in the chat, and we'll have time to discuss those in more detail at the end of our session. So thanks for that. And I'm urging others to share your thoughts as well. I'm going to now introduce our last speaker, Joel Sulsif, who's the Senior Program Officer, Marine Plastics in the Global Marine and Polar Program at the International Union of Conservation of Nature. Welcome, it's great to have you on board, and we're really looking forward to your thoughts on examples of effective quantifiable solutions to addressing plastic pollution. Welcome. You're just on mute, Joel. And he's got a nice big surfboard there behind him. We were talking about that before. So he's definitely in theme today. So congratulations.
Thank you. Is it possible to have the presentation that I sent really late, or I can share it from here?
You can share it if you want. So what
Yeah,
I'll do is
that was a
I can
presentation
stop share.
by Janica.
Yep.
Maybe
Yep.
share screen. This will stop others from, let's say yes, and then would be this one. Share.
Yep, that's looking good.
Like,
and I like this cover slide as well.
It's kind of half a slide, right?
Yeah, it's half a slide at the moment. So it should come up. There we go. Perfect.
Okay. I'm going to be brief as soon as I can. Thank you very much for the invitation. My name is João. I'm a biotech engineer. I live in Switzerland. I work at the headquarters of IUCN. I've been working in plastic projects since 8 years now. We started with research projects, and we are now doing small and developing states projects. So I'm not going to lecture anyone about plastic. In a way, we are all experts in plastic because we touch it so many times, and we buy it and we use it and we discard it. So not going to go over this much longer. Just a couple of notions I would like to leave. I really like this idea here about how much effort you have to put into place to actually produce something, and then this is of course related with our capacity to innovate, but also to be lazy at the same time, which they go hand in hand. On the right hand side, I have some photos I took in the Pacific. One of them is one, it's a landfill that is constructed just on top of mangrove, where basically it's a landfill of tires. Then they cover it with plastic. Then they receive the plastics, and of course this leachates directly into the ocean, which is quite amazing. So this is our culture of, as you understand, the famous slide that commemorates 50s and 60s about liberating household from extensive work on cleaning, on arranging, and let's go into the throwaway culture. I really like this photo because it reminds me where most of things started. This is an equation that I like to work around it because it never makes sense, and it's kind of easy to explain. If all the operations I'm going to tell you after count as one, then it's very strange that at the end actually equals 0. So I don't know how much you are familiar on appraisal drilling operations. This is upstream in terms of oil and gas operations that you drill. You do commercial appraisal. You cap the well if there's oil, and then you extract the oil when you sell the well to a company. The company extracts oil, transports the oil. The oil is transported into a refinery, and then it's processed. So all of these operations cost millions and millions. So the question is, of course, how the hell does it end up having 0 value in terms of product? This is very strange. So this is an equation that we are still trying to understand, which for me, I still understand that the main point is that plastic has a negative value at the end of life. And of course, if something doesn't have value, we throw it away. So it's still a question of giving value to something, if possible. If we cannot, we just cannot produce it. It doesn't make any sense. This slide here is related with the necessity of standardization, so we can all speak the same language. When we started the project 8 years ago, we understand that we were measuring different things across the world. So I could never compare items with kilos. For instance, in Portugal, we were collecting the items, and in Japan, they were reporting in kilos. And then we had to use allometric functions to understand how does a bottle and a half of PET convert into grams, and so on and so forth. So this is the basis of the binding agreement, which is let's all speak a common language, because it's the only way to move this process forward. So this is why I named the program at IUCN Close the Plastic Tap. And the reason for this was from the beginning was clear that you cannot, the analogy is very simple. It's like emptying, if you try to empty a swimming pool using a spoon, and you understand that the hose is open, it doesn't make sense. So plastic is the same thing. And I deal with people coming to me every month in the last 8 years with the solution to clean the ocean, which is very interesting. I understand, raise awareness and so on and so forth, but actually don't do anything before you understand the sources. And when you understand the sources, then you deal with the problem. So this is where we started 8 years ago, exactly, is can we understand the sources? Where is it all coming from? Can we quantify it? Do we understand what type of polymer? What is the quantity? If it's seasonal, if it's not seasonal, what are the pathways? And trying to understand what was the behavior. Back then, I remember the first conversations I had. I was invited by the American Chemistry Council and Plastics Europe in Brussels for the poly talks. And for the first time, I told them that most probably plastics degrade to microplastics, but after microplastics, most surely they will degrade into something, and I'm pretty sure it's not good for our health. And then they didn't invite me again, of course, because yeah, it's not really the topic that was very interesting for them. So this is where we started our journey in terms of quantification. So you can see in the middle, there's the Azores. This is where our first project started 8 years ago. It was a research project where I tried to understand or have a baseline assessment of 12 commercial fish species. And then we did a full quantification of microplastic in the Baltic Basin to understand from which sector, what type of polymer, what quantity per year, and what pathway. Then 1 year later, we did the same for Mediterranean. We tried to understand what was the contribution per country, even landlocked countries like Switzerland or Sudan via the Nile. How do they contribute to the Mediterranean microplastic and what sources? Then we move more into, now that we have the quantification ongoing, we need to move into solutions, but how do we work them out? Is this our role at IUCN to do it? What are the organizations that can work with us? So we started to work a bit in a direction that all our projects would aim at solutions. So we get a special focus in tourism, mainly because, as this slide illustrates, if we consider an average EU citizen and the plastic footprint that he produces per year, you understand that from a full year, if he goes for 1 week holidays into an island with mismanaged systems, 2/3 of his footprint come from that only 1 week. And this is massive. And it's a big responsibility. Well, for citizens, for islanders, and of course for tourist companies that bring those tourists to the island. So this is a slide to consider. So when we decided to work around the small and developing states around the islands, this was our concept originally. How we thought we could solve the problem was trying to understand all the inputs and all the outputs, and everything that is not in the equation is leakage. So the whole point is, how do you address leakage? You understand the sources, you understand the outputs. Are we exporting? Are we incinerating? What are we doing? And the whole idea was that we could basically cut down all these emissions and work towards a common solution across several islands. So we launched the project, which is a plastic waste free island project. This plastic free island project is now running in 3 islands in the Caribbean, Antigua, Barbuda, Grenada, and St. Lucia, and in Pacific in Samoa, Fiji, and Vanuatu. We have a child project also occurring in the Mediterranean, which is in Menorca and Cyprus. The full idea is that we do a quantification initially, so we call it material flow analysis. We do a full quantification of plastic waste per sector. After the quantification, we do a qualification, meaning we need to know not only how much plastic we are generating in terms of waste, but in which condition. Is it monomaterial? Is it contaminated with grease or with sand or with salt? Can I use it for something? So the whole idea is that we understand and we divide this into 2 streams. One that is easily recyclable, and the other one, let's we can call it non-recyclable, but it's more hard to recycle. And of course, we would have to go into definitions of what really recycle means, which is not easy. And this comes again with the standardization and definitions that we all need. But the whole idea is that we understand per state, per small island developing state, which route should we follow in terms of what we do with the plastic that can be easily processed, and what can we do with the plastic that cannot be easily processed. So we come up with two outputs for the project. So the idea is that we have value chains being created for the plastic that is easily recycled and the one that cannot be easily recycled. What do you do? We try to answer also this. Of course, each country is a country, and the economy doesn't allow sometimes. The business case is not there, of course. And if we're talking about a very, very small population, then of course, the only way out is actually to export it. There's no sound management way to process it on island. So in that case, requiring a waiver from BSR and basically exporting this to a country that has the capacity to deal with this type of waste. So at the end, we have been working with these 6 countries, developing all the reports needed, all the economics around each of the business case. How do you create a new value chain? How do you generate jobs? And we are now most probably moving into the phase that we try to do a matchmaking between entrepreneurs and investors. The whole idea is that at the end, we have a scalable, replicable framework or methodology on how to address plastic from an island perspective. So just to reiterate the main from the project, generation of knowledge that is provided by to each of the governments in terms of the plastic that is generated per year, per country. We support the government in the creation and the generation not only of jobs, of course, and creation of new value chains, but supporting the draft of policy. And we are now moving into the phase that we try to facilitate investment in waste management. And at the end, of course, developing the blueprint. So just to finalize, because I'm taking too much time, on the left-hand side, we have the solutions, and I call it solutions because we had a suite of solutions that we discussed in each country with the working groups from each country, and we try to show basically the information we generated in terms of how much waste you guys are producing, in what quantity, what is the type of waste we're talking about, in which condition, if it's seasonal or if it's not seasonal, and knowing that there are people that would be interested in doing something. We presented 9 solutions, and they would have to pick 1 or 2 solutions that they deem more interesting for their country. So I was recently in St. Lucia, where I saw the dispensing system for restaurants to work very well, where people slowly start to actually bring their own container. And then actually they buy first the container, and then the container is washed and it's clean, so they can always bring food back and forth instead of using styrofoam. In another country in the Caribbean, we try to develop internally the capacity to process PET. We could not. So what we did is an agreement where the bottles, PET bottles, come out from the island through the 40-foot container. They go to Mexico, ALPA, and then ALPA recycles them into free farms and ships them back into the island. So this is about a 2-bottle scheme. So each country had the solution oriented for them. But we are talking about, obviously, about the plastic that can be easily recycled. And of course, we have the potential to transform this into modular furniture or containers, whatever it is. But let's be honest about this. This is the smallest amount of plastic that is generated. All the other plastic that cannot be processed, we come up with a tool that is called Deplastify, whereby which we introduce all the data that we know about the plastic that we generate. We introduce, for instance, kilowatt per hour of electricity in our country, and the tool will give us the most suitable technology to process that plastic that cannot be easily recycled. So basically, these are the 2 outputs of Plastic Waste Free Island. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm available for more questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joel. And I'm just going to go back onto this here, and I'll just leave it at that page here. And I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions, and then we're going to open it up. And I'm really going to ask a few people in the audience to actually speak. So be prepared. I think I saw some really good comments from Samoa, Vanuatu, Solomon Islands. And if you are representing one of those countries today, feel free to put your hand up now so that we can unmute you, because we'd really like to hear what you think is some of the challenges for your country in developing policy. And what are some of your successes? So please put your hand up, otherwise I may just try and ask you kindly, but it would be great if you could put your hand up, and then Jess will be able to unmute you. That would be great. Joel, you had lots of information there, and you're working really solidly there with 6 countries. How difficult is it, that quantification part? I mean, you mentioned that was really important at the start, and you had quite comprehensive quantification, understanding how much plastic was being produced and used and wasted. How difficult is that?
Well, the most difficult, well, let's say the most difficult is try to convince the government in a way that the quantification is done for us, by us, using a consultancy firm paid by the Norwegian government, but it's a one-time off. So the idea is it's not difficult to convince the government. It's trying to understand that this is a one-time off. It's a process that is lengthy, and it's very, very expensive, but can set the standard on how to quantify all this waste. But the full idea here, and it's more difficult and depends from country to country, is that we are not supposed to repeat this quantification every year. What we are supposed to do is try to explain, to basically build capacity on the ground on how to quantify this without going through a lengthy, very expensive project, because the countries do not have money to spend with this type of operations. So the first, we've done it. It's great. So it's very complex, because you have to have, of course, full authorization, permission, and acknowledgement from the authorities to do so. Sometimes more difficult and more challenging. Technically, let's just put it like this. Imagine that you're in a tropical climate, very hot, and you have to open 400 bags of trash and count them and separate. So each individual trash bag is open on a table with a video camera recording, and we separate each type of plastic. It's a very lengthy, and it's a dirty, smelly, heavy work that needs to be done. But at the end, we'll have an exact idea what type of consumption all the households will have. Not all, but 400 bags is already a good sample size. So you understand, but because we need to classify, we need to understand exactly where the problem is. This is where in the presentation initially I said, first understand your sources. You cannot aim for solutions if you don't know them. So it's complex. Yeah.
Excellent. No, it's good, but it's obviously really critical, as you say. So I think that really emphasizes that point around the importance of understanding and quantifying at the very start and having that baseline. Thank you very much, Joel. I'm just going to see if I can actually ask Wendy Betty from Solomon Islands. Would you be prepared to just tell us a couple of examples of what you're doing in the Solomon Islands and what is difficult? And I also see Ione from Vanuatu. I'm just wondering if I can get Jess to unmute or invite them to be panelists. Jess, is that possible?
Wendy is unmuted, and Ione is as well. So
excellent. Excellent. Wendy, you gave some really good examples of work happening in the Solomon Islands. What are you doing there, and what do you find difficult?
Hello, everyone. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for giving me this opportunity to share. As I've mentioned in the chat, in 2018, we've held a meeting with some stakeholders on plastic, on the plastic ban, and far we haven't moved forward with the plastic ban since then. So we are hoping that through the current work with JPRISM, a JICA-funded project, we'll continue from where we left in 2018 and work with other partners and stakeholders to work towards implementing the plastic ban. So the plastic item that we are planning to ban for a start would be the plastic shopping bags. So so far we haven't done much on the plastic ban since 2018, and hopefully this year we'll start more work. We'll do more work on the plastic ban. Yeah. So yeah, nothing much since 2018.
No, but I think that's good.
Yeah, that's
yeah. And that
I think that.
Go.
So I think our major challenge would be we don't have we have a legislation, but it's broad. So maybe we need to have a specific regulation that is focused on plastic ban. Yeah. That's that's a challenge for us right now.
No, that's a very good point. I think that's a challenge for many. And there's some resources around that we can share after this workshop. And also I see that lots of people are saying, can you please share, there's lots of people in the chat going, can you please share what you're doing in your country? So that is another good way of learning what your neighbours are doing. And I'm sure SPREP and Jeff Islands will be able to do that, facilitate that through the Jeff Islands Forum, for example, and through SPREP discussions. And I was going to say, it's good though that you're looking this year to doing sort of, I guess, revitalizing that work and looking at how you could tackle plastic bags in particular. So thank you so much, Wendy, for joining us. And I think I have, is Ione or somebody from Vanuatu on unmuted?
That's right, she is. Ione, you can unmute your mic when you're ready. Oh, she's unmuted. Go ahead, Ione.
Okay, thank you, Alison and Melanie. So for Vanuatu, we started the ban in 2018, and the target, the government's target, is single-use plastics. So in 2018, we banned 3 items. So that would be shopping bags, plastic straws, and polystyrene takeaway boxes. And then in the second phase of the ban in 2019, the list of the banned items that was agreed upon, there were 8 items, including disposable diapers. Unfortunately for us, we have been able to ban 7 other items, except for the diaper, the disposable diapers. And so I will list those items in the chat, the 7 items, because I'd like to spend some time talking about the disposable diapers. So like in 2019, although the list, it was included in the list to be banned, we had business houses especially going against it. And then we had a change in decision by the Council of Ministers. So it has come to be a very important issue for the government, because we saw the change in decision just because of that. And so in 2020, we still couldn't ban disposable diapers in total. So the Council of Ministers changed the decision and agreed that the Department of Environment has to find suitable solutions to manage used disposable diapers before we could do anything. So since then, we have developed the idea that if because reality says we can't manage it as a waste, we can't manage it. So since then, the department has developed a draft regulation that is yet to be endorsed for the control on the importation of diapers. So in that draft, it's simply which business houses that want to import diapers must have an import permit with the department. And then for those business houses that do not have import permits, but wish to sell, they'll have to have a license to sell. So that particular measure is mainly because when we go out in the islands, so Vanuatu is a group of islands, we're actually discouraging those in the islands to import or to have licenses to sell this, because that with their situation, it would be better off they're using reusable alternatives. Yeah, so that's kind of the update on the disposable diapers. So once we have that regulation in place, then we could start thinking about the next phase. So the third phase. For now, some of us are already considering that having the diaper to have the diaper ban regulation itself is already sort of the third phase of the ban. But then we think that it's best that the regulation be in place for a certain years only, and then we come in with the total ban, because we already have national alternatives of reusable nappies, and also we have the main supermarket has already started selling alternatives of reusable nappies. Yeah. So that's kind of where we're at. I'm just going to briefly talk about our challenges. So we, as already mentioned, we are a group of islands. So maintaining monitoring and compliance to the ban, to the ban so far, that's a major challenge, given that we only have one compliance officer for the entire country. We only have one compliance officer who's also responsible to look at other environmental laws. So EIA laws and all the other ones, conservation and all the other ones. So I'd say a gap for us now is also having the department to have a separate regulatory arm to focus on the on enforcing those environmental laws. So because it's no use making laws that can't be enforced or are just there, but compliance and enforcement is not really working for us. So I'd say that's one major gap for us. For now, I feel that the government has prioritized budget for us to work on the plastic bans. So we really have our challenge really now is having that regulatory arm to support us with enforcement, compliance and enforcement works. Thank you.
That's a really, really good point. And thank you for sharing all that information, really useful and interesting to see with the disposable nappies too, with businesses. And somebody mentioned that they thought parents might have been the ones that were the pushback against getting rid of disposable nappies, but it seems that was not the case. And my understanding was that there was very good support within the community for that ban. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm really interested in the challenges around monitoring. Also this issue around, I guess, resourcing one compliance officer for the total country, but having to do multiple different compliance activities, not necessarily just around plastic pollution work. And so that need for support for enforcement and compliance and that regulatory support. So very, very useful and valuable information. And thank you very much. I'm going to actually open it up to Samoa, and I think is it Sumalo? I think, could you put your hand up and maybe we could unmute you. And I see Patricia had some really, Patricia Perdris also had some really good comments. If you could also just put your hand up so we can identify you. And I'm just going to ask Samoa, is there somebody there that can speak?
Yeah, so Afale is here and he's got his hand up.
Excellent.
He just needs to unmute. There we go. talking permitted. You should be able to go ahead, Afele, and unmute yourself now. There we go. You're live.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Alison?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. Thank you very much for being part of this great conversation and sharing experiences to learn from each other. For Samoa, just a quickly update from our efforts. We started off in 2018, now introducing our waste management plastic ban regulations, mainly like to looking at phasing down and phasing out approach, because we cannot do everything all at once. So we started off with the ban on importations, further distribution, manufacture of the single-use plastic shopping bag. That process was very tough in terms of community consultations, business sector consultations, looking at alternatives to basically, like, back up, like, what the private sector wants and the people wants, given our reliance on plastic, that sort of thing. But finally, they give in, like, to support the cause, because everyone is in fact is affected, especially small island states' reliance on ocean, and everything, like, surrounds us is ocean. So this is really good, like, to get their backup and get their support from the public. So we again banned single-use shopping bag plastic in 2018, and then again, like I said, slowly, like, we're moving on. For example, 2020, we banned styrofoam and other items, like, for example, plastic straws, food plates and cups. So again, we are now looking at other problematic plastics, because while we observe, like, once we ban something and then people move to another type of plastic, like, so where we need some technical review assistance, like, in order for us, like, to add more, like, into our list. And then we're looking at starting another amendment, like, in a new financial year, which in Samoa starts in July to June next year. At least, like, in every financial year, we can look into adding, like, plastic ban in some other items. Some of the key challenges we're facing, of course, like, like any other small island state, I think the key is enforcement. How could we be on a full swing, like, to enforce all these legislations, given limited resources and stuff like that. But we're trying our best within our means, but these are some of the challenges we're facing in terms of enforcement to ensure compliance. Others are including, like, for example, like looking at consumer change behavior, like, we really need to see, like, how we can best, like, convince people, like, to change behavior, like, so that they can be self-control or self-managed, like, in order to support this ban, because small island states rely on too much, like, on plastic products coming from overseas, and once we ban one, and then they look into other sort of plastics, like, the manufacturers, like, to wrap things up, like, and send it to our island. So these are some of the challenges we're facing. Also, how community perceive all these bans, and looking at, like, availability of alternatives, because not just ban things, but also look at appropriate alternatives, like, to be available for private sectors and for community. But luckily, like, as Samoa, like, has a very strong culture, like looking at what's around us, our environment, so that we can make sure that those are available, like, our local customs, so that in replacements of the use of plastics and stuff like that. Also, like, our capability and capacity, like, in terms of looking at upscaling of small scale, like, recycling efforts, because we really need to look into strengthening our recycling efforts to ensure that we can strengthen the 3Rs, good management practice, like, So these are some of the key issues, the key challenges that we're facing. But again, Samoa is committed, like, as everyone else, fight against plastic, and to see what's relevant as we progress with our efforts over time. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
No, thank you so much. And thank you for outlining that. And I think also key points and also referenced by many others too around some of those challenges. So thank you for that. And I'm just going to open the floor to Patricia. Are you able to speak? Because we might end with you. You've said a very good comment here that I loved in the chat around the important point is to address the source. We can keep telling people to stop using plastics, but they will not stop as long as it is available. So if you've got the chance to just maybe you could be our last speaker here before we close, I think that would be nice, because you also mentioned some points around the importance of potentially EPR, extended producer responsibility schemes. Are you able to speak?
Patty, I think you can unmute now. Go ahead. Yeah, you're live.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, okay. Greetings to all of you and thank you for this opportunity. And my sincere apologies, I was late because I had another meeting, but this is a very dear topic to me, so as it is part of my job as well. But yes, I believe that the point is really to address the source. And I'm sure my colleagues here agree with me. And that is our mission is really to promote EPR. Because when we try to educate people about waste management in general, we're really looking at their level of consciousness, their psyche. And a lot of times that is our challenge, is to make them understand. And so when I say that they will not stop using plastic because it is available, yeah, they're not looking at the other features or at the other sides that we look at as experts in waste, because they're only going to view it as something that they will use it at that moment and then they throw it away, they discard it. And if they really have reached a level of consciousness, they will move on to the next step and properly dispose it. So I think we should look at that. Here in the FSM, we're challenged to promote the 3 Rs. I mean, we can come up with different laws and regulations and all that, but we also have to do our part to continue to promote the 3 Rs so that people are aware of yes, it is available, but then because of its detrimental effects, we need to also reuse it or recycle or reduce it in such a way that we are contributing to the to a clean islands and healthier communities throughout the world. So that's my take on this, and thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. And thank you for those comments in the chat. And thank you to everyone in the chat. There's quite an active discussion going on there, and that's great to see. So what we might do is, as well, since we didn't put Q&As in the Q&A, we might actually just do a quick summary of those key points in the chat and shared today and put those in the report for the meeting. I think that would be a nice way of sharing some of the knowledge that we've generated together there. And I guess in today's session, summing up from my perspective, we shared a lot of information on the global commitment at the start, but also on the importance of the urgent need for action. And whatever the approach that you take, the important point is really to take that life cycle approach to addressing plastic pollution, addressing it at the source, looking at all points of the system and opportunities to reduce plastic pollution, to eliminate, innovate, and circulate. Joel provided some concrete examples on the ground related to quantification activities. And Liz really shared from her perspective, and we chose New Zealand because they are actually the only signatory to the global commitment in this region. And so we would really encourage others, and particularly Pacific Islands, small island developing states, to consider joining so that next time we have this sort of presentation, we have an example from the Pacific Islands that can talk about the global commitment and their targets and baseline and commitments under that. But we've also had a really good discussion at the very end around the actions and barriers to progress. And I think that's the really important point, is continuing to share our progress, our challenges, the opportunities, and looking at ways we can collaborate and work together to address plastic pollution, which is just such a serious issue for all of us. So I'm going to hand the session back to Melanie now. She's going to give a quick summary, and then we're over, but thank you very much from me. Melanie.
Thanks, Alison. Wow, what an incredible session. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Alison, Liz, and Zhao for the presentation. But absolutely huge thank you to all of our Pacific colleagues that have been so active in the discussion. The information shared in the discussion is really, truly inspiring, and we're very, very excited to bring this information together. You can see the website jeffislands.org is there on the screen. This is the space where we're gathering, sharing, and collecting SIDS knowledge and bringing it back to you. So I saw a fellow reach out to the cooks and ask for, a copy of the plastics regulation, and that's the sort of thing that we're bringing together and really aiming to have a very comprehensive library on jeffislands.org. So thank you for sharing your on-the-ground experiences, your challenges. We're aiming to provide assistance, both through the global commitment and also through Jeff Islands. Also, there's other key projects represented here. Pack Waste Plus team are on the webinar as well. Julie from SWAP is also here. So I think it's been a really wonderful opportunity to exchange, a great start to our webinar series. We're very much looking forward to bringing you further webinars. We're going to be doing 20 under islands over the 5 years. We will be working with Pack Waste Plus team to develop a webinar on sustainable financing. We've discussed a lot today about the need for EPR. Sustainable financing is key to any of these actions that we're taking regarding regulating plastics. So we're looking forward to that. So just a final note to say thank you so much for being here, for participating, and please join the Green Forum group on plastics. I've said it a million times in the chat, but it's a great place to come together. And we will be advancing that forum and sharing a lot of information there. Please join yourself, and please invite 5 colleagues to join as well, so that we can really have a very solid community of practice exchanging on plastics. Thank you again, and back to you, Alison, for the final closure.
No, that's it from me. Please keep safe, everyone. Have a great day, great rest of the afternoon, a great rest of the night for Melanie, who's from France in the middle of the night. But I'm hoping it's a beautiful day in the Pacific Islands over there, and I wish I was there as well. Unfortunately, I'm not, but maybe next time. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.